The internet is full of urban myths, legends, and conspiracies. But just like everything, it all had to start somewhere. In today's video, what makes this topic so fascinating is that there are still people to this day who believe the first ever internet hoax to be real. This is the story of Ongs Hat.
Storytelling is something that goes all the way back to my youth. I had an unusual upbringing in that I had a grandfather who was a very big influence on me. He was one of the last independent owners of a three-ring circus, and so I spent the summers with him on the road. I grew up around a lot of people who told good stories. They were able to captivate an audience and be able to spellbind people and even get points across.
Joseph Matheny is the creator of the oldest folktale to have ever appeared online. From being inspired by the circus and their passion in storytelling, Joseph began taking a major in cinematography during the early 80s. This happened around the exact same time video and filmmaking was becoming more accessible to the general public.
Video has been around for a long time. It's kind of the basis of television, but these were not devices that were affordable or accessible to the commercial home video person. In the early to mid 80s, that started to change, where the Betamax and the VHS markets first started happening. My imagination was just ignited by this, and I realized that there was this new format that I could do something and I could get it directly to the person who was going to experience it at home, and I didn't have to go through the gatekeeping process of millions of dollars to make a movie, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a movie, independent.
With film becoming more accessible to Joseph himself, he decided to experiment. For his college thesis, he decided to make a booklet and short film that would connect to each other. The only way to understand the story would be to read the book and watch the film. Within the story, there would be a date, time, and location. And if you put them together and visited that place at that specific time, Joseph had hired individuals to perform the final act of his story in front of them. This itch to experiment with different forms of media and blending it together only grew when he was first introduced to the early forms of the internet.
Just about the time I got out of school, I intersected with the home computing revolution which was going on, which at that time it was build your own computers. And I discovered that with this thing called a modem, you could dial in to this other computer, which was called a bulletin board system, and you could interact with other people through their computers. And then of course the internet, public access to the internet, got added to that mix in the early 90s. And man, you think that the video thing lit me up? Then that really lit me up. When I saw that, I'm like, stage 2, man. It's like video is cool and books are cool and like live performances are cool, but there's this other thing which is all of that.
With no time to waste, Joseph began planning a story that he could incorporate within the internet age. He knew exactly where he was going to base it: a small ghost town known as Ongs Hat, located in New Jersey's Pine Barrens.
There's a lot of legend around that area, and then if you ever go out to the Pine Barrens and talk to the residents, there's a million legends. Something called the Jersey Devil. There's a legend about the area of Ongs Hat. There were helicopters that came and dropped in soldiers that were wearing like weird unmarked uniforms that didn't have American insignia on them, and they were there to get these people that were living in the woods, and they rounded them up and took them away, and never everybody heard about it or heard about them ever again. And I've been told this story like 20 times from residents of that area. Like, people, this is a story that people know there. It's a local legend. So there's lots of these local legends, including the legend of how the town got its name. There's like 15 of those. Like, I've never found like a definitive story of how Ongs Hat got its name, other than it had something to do with a guy named Jacob Ong and a hat. And then just like where it goes from there, it just bifurcates into all these different iterations of the story, which I love, because I love folklore. And so I'm like, okay, this could be the beginning of this thing I can create.
Joseph was about to be in his element. Rather than telling a story in one place, he began taking bits and pieces of his narrative and slowly incorporated it throughout multiple areas of the internet and other forms of media.
So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start generating content about this story. and it's going to be modular, and it's going to come out in pieces, and it's going to be, some of it's going to be on this place and that place, and it's going to be scattered all over this bulletin board complex, and then later this internet complex, so people can find it like a scavenger hunt and try to put it together. And so I did 2 more pieces, which was an interview that I collaborated with Nick Herbert on, and then an interview that I collaborated with somebody posing as the writer of the catalog. And about that time, the catalog was being put together, and so I digitized that, and then we started printing that up and mailing it out to anybody we could think of, had any kind of interest in fringe technology, UFOs, paranormal. Back then, that meant like printing this thing up, putting it in an envelope, sending it off to a remailer in Hong Kong. The remailer in Hong Kong would mail it to these people, so they would be getting a letter from Hong Kong with this catalog in it and no other explanation. And then I was like watching what was happening. I would get their catalog like a month later, and this material would be included for sale for $2 in Xerox form in their catalog, which didn't piss me off. It actually, I went, yes, score!
The story goes as told. A group of scientists began experimenting around Ongs Hat during the mid-80s. Upon their research, they discovered something. A way to travel across alternate universes. They designed a machine that would allow them to pass through using their mind. But one day, they discovered an alternate reality that was exactly the same as ours, except humans had never existed. So, these group of individuals collectively decided to take all of their equipment and belongings with them to this new reality and continue their experiments in peace. Legend has it that these scientists are still living to this day, continuing their experiments away from humanity. Ongs Hat attracted many people online. If you had been on the internet during the 90s, you were heavily likely to have found something, or at least one reference to Ongs Hat. There were so many places where Ongs Hat was being discussed that it was quite hard to keep up with the whole story. So, Joseph decided to set up a website of his own and link all the places he believed were relevant to help people keep up with the narrative. Near the beginning, most individuals participating knew that the content was just a work of fiction, and that's why they enjoyed it.
I didn't expect anybody was taking any of this as gospel, none of it literally, because like I said, it was pretty hammy. And I thought people really would understand that this was a put on, and an affectation, if nothing else. Privately, I would talk to people and I'd be like, you do understand this is a story, right? Because a couple of times I was like not sure the way they were behaving. And they're like, no, dude, I'm just playing along. I'm like, awesome. Okay, cool. I just had to check in,
For the most part, everyone seemed to be getting along. There were a couple of instances where people may have stepped over the line, but there was no malicious intent behind it, and all was forgiven usually. For example, Joseph's address had actually been found by fans of his story, and a group of kids traveled to his home and camped on his lawn until he came back from work, just so they could ask for an autograph. Unfortunately, the good intentions didn't last.
The forums at the beginning were a fairly pleasant place to hang out. People were having fun. There was a lot of playing along and wink, wink, nudge, nudging, and that was really cool. It was only later, as this thing started to cross over into the more serious UFO conspiracy paranormal realm, that the audience, in the forums at least, began to change.
During the 90s, Joseph began seeing certain individuals entering the forums believing the legend of Ongs Hat to be real. In fact, a rumor across the internet had emerged that people were starting to get sick whenever they researched the story. While Joseph tried his best explaining that the whole thing was a work of fiction to these individuals, the number of people believing it to be real only increased the more the paranormal community heard about it.
Did you see was there a specific point that you remember where this increase happened? Do you think you have any idea where they came from, or was it just like a gradual over time as it was just getting...
My fault.
Okay.
I take 100% responsibility. I thought it would be cool to do coast to coast, and I played it in character, and I thought that would be interesting. It was interesting from the perspective of somebody who was doing immersive acting, I got contacted by radio shows all over the world to come on and do an hour, do a drive time, do all these different things. And they quickly found out that you couldn't poke fun at me because I could poke fun at myself quicker and better than they could. And some people like that. And so I did hundreds of hours of radio that year and a couple of TV appearances, and I did them all in character.
A shift in tone took place after Joseph had been invited onto a popular radio show known as Coast to Coast. He came onto the show in character, performing as an individual that claims they know the truth about the legends surrounding Ongs Hat and how a group of scientists traveled to an alternate dimension, never to return.
All right, and are these what you're using as the premise to determine whether they in fact found a way to do dimensional travel?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
At what stage are you in your research of verifying their research?
Well, the first stage we're in right now is we're coming to kind of the end of verifying, was there a group that was in Ongs Hat, New Jersey doing some sort of alternative science research?
Joseph had done this plenty of times before on TV and radio, and never had much of a problem with how the audience reacted. However, Coast to Coast was different.
At that time, Coast to Coast AM had a listenership of 20 million listeners a night. But back then, there was no AM radio show that was doing the type of material that Art Bell was doing. He was it.
It was not only a popular radio show, but it was a show that specifically focuses on talking about the paranormal and conspiracy theories, meaning the majority of people that tuned into the show were much more likely to believe ghosts and conspiracy theories were real.
And somehow I managed to get on that show. I made the decision, I'm going to do this. And this is going to be the grand finale. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to come out and I'm going to say this was a project, this was an art experiment. And then I wanted to have a follow-up on the forum and say, let's talk about why you believed it, why you didn't believe it, what you got out of it, did you have weird experiences? That third part there never happened, because after Coast to Coast, that's when everybody showed up and the tone of the conversation on the forum started to change from participatory to adversarial.
Straight after the broadcast, a swarm of conspiracy theorists began taking over the forums, bombarding the chats with insane theories about the events of Ongs Hat, claiming that they knew more about the story than Joseph himself. Some even going on to say they had intercepted the messages sent to Joseph, and now that they were the ones that were one step ahead of everyone else. We shouldn't trust him, they said. But you can trust us. We know the truth. Joseph doesn't. It didn't just stop at people trying to hijack the narrative. Because Joseph had played in character as this detective on the Coast to Coast radio show, the people who believed his character to be real began looking into his personal life and started contacting anyone related to him in order to find secrets that they believed he was holding on to.
Other people called places I was working. Other people would find who I was dating and contact them. I mean, it was crazy. It was insane after a while.
Because his address had already been found online, it wasn't long before he got more visitors.
So I caught one guy. I had a 3-story house at the time, and the first story of my house was my office. There was somebody living, a family member living in that part of the downstairs, and the third story where I lived. And she came running upstairs one night and said, "There's a guy downstairs, looking through the picture window." Like, what? He's like, "Yeah, and he doesn't look too sane." So I grabbed my pistol and I went downstairs and I walked out on him. He turned around and I said, "Who are you? What the fuck are you doing looking in my house?" And then he started babbling something about, "I want to see the place where you keep the egg." And, it became clear very quickly to me that this person was not in their right mind. And so I said, you need to walk out that way and go down this walkway, and I'm going to be right behind you. You need to go out that gate and you need to get off my property. I'm going to walk you all the way off the property. And eventually he did start walking, and I walked him out with the gun trained on him, and he was still babbling the whole time and making weird, just word salad. And then he turned around when I got to the edge of the property, and he stopped before going off of the property. And he turned and he looked at me with I don't know if you ever dealt with an insane person who does that smile. where it's not a happy smile. It's like it's a smile that says I'm a really fucked up person and I don't get what's going on. You know what I mean? And when I saw that smile, I barked at him and I said, "You need to pay attention. This is a 9mm pistol. It's cocked and the safety is off. It's loaded. It's pointed at your head. Do you not fucking understand the severity of this goddamn situation?" And then I saw the light come on in his eyes, and for a moment I had his attention. And I said, "You need to walk that way and keep walking. And if I see you back here again, I'm going to shoot you first and then I'm going to call the cops." And he walked, and I never saw him again. But that person was looking at a way to get into my house. There was somebody downstairs who was, vulnerable. I mean, she was a very small, slight person. If she would have walked out on this guy, he was large. He could have taken her in a moment. He was unhinged. He could have gone through that picture window. And this was like not just one of these people showed up at the house, but that's probably the most severe example I can give you of like how bad it started to get.
I think it's important to pause here for a second and address something that will probably be brought up in the comments. Disclaimers. Whenever I've covered a similar story to this, the argument of, well, if they just used disclaimers to let people know it wasn't real, this stuff wouldn't have happened or it wouldn't have been as extreme. But here's the thing. In this case, Joseph did use disclaimers. Pretty much everywhere.
And by that time I had produced a CD-ROM of all the material that was kind of used as the basis for the game. And it had a bunch of hidden things in it. But one thing that wasn't hidden is if you put the CD-ROM in your computer and you opened it up, right in the root of the CD-ROM was a document called Secret Doc. And you opened that document up and it explained exactly what this was. It said these are the influences, here's the goal of the project, and this is what we're doing, what I'm trying to do with this project. And so I wanted to make sure that that was always there, and it was. Plus I had given interviews in a couple of different media or places, which, like at the time, not every media property put their stuff instantly online. So I scanned it and I put it on my website so that it could be easily found. So there was always like 4 or 5 things that people could go reference to say, this is a performance art project. This is avant-garde art. This is, this is what I'm trying to do. So it was never hidden, right? It was always pretty obvious to find.
Which means a lot of these individuals who were claiming it to be real were actively ignoring the disclaimers. In fact, a lot of these users had to have known it was fake and were using Joseph's story to start their own cult.
I did the radio, I did Coast to Coast, and then I spent 2000 fighting one startup cult after another. That's what I call them. It's like startup cults. There's like 4 people, it's like, we have the truth, it's like, Matheny's an idiot.
One individual came up to Joseph many years later to apologize and had explained that his wife had left him and taken the kids. Then these people running the conspiracy groups took him in during his vulnerable state and fed him false information about Ongs Hat. How true that actually is can be debatable, but it's certainly interesting to point out with everything else we've learned about this story. By this point, Joseph didn't really have many more options. The conspiracy theorists were filling the chats and taking the story into their own direction. Once he shot one person down, 5 more would show up. A lot of the people who were here just for the story and to have fun were almost pretty much bullied off of the sites.
Of course, I was getting harassed online continually, but then it started to bleed over into real life, and that's when I got angry. Very angry. Because this was all happening because there was a group of people online that were spreading disinformation that I think in some cases they knew they were spreading disinformation. Are you familiar with the act of swatting from the gaming community? So what they were doing to me was a form of swatting before swatting. They were winding up crazy people and sending them my way.
So, Joseph made the tough decision of ending his story near the start of the 2000s. After ending his story, the conspiracy theorists obviously tried to keep it going by starting up their own websites, but because Joseph had shut down his own website, there was no place for them to promote their causes anymore. So, their online presence eventually disappeared. It's unfortunate from Joseph's perspective, because he actually had a very interesting idea on how he was going to end this whole thing.
I had a couple more pieces that I wanted to roll out, and then I wanted to conclude and say, game over, we're done. Now what I want to do is put a forum together, have everybody that participated come on the forum, and let's all talk about our experience. What could I have done better? What did I do good? Did you have weird experiences? Because a lot of people did. People that were playing the game in good faith actually said when you're doing this, you get all these weird synchronicities. And I started, it's that was cool. I like that part of it. And I wanted to talk about that more. It's do you think that you had that experience because you were now looking for it? Was it confirmation bias? The 23 enigma, placebo effect, the Mandela effect. But, it was a legitimate phenomena, and therefore we could talk about it without being judgmental. What I hoped would happen is we would have people saying, I'm skeptical enough to say I don't know if it was some or all of the things that you just mentioned above, yet I enjoyed the experience. And I had many people, I still do. The great thing about this is there's enough people that contact me that tell me that they had the ride of their life during this period of time that I feel oh, okay, thank God. Not everybody wants to hang me and burn me, It's and really it's just a conspiracy crowd that wants to do that. And that's not surprising if you look at the history of ufology, how ugly some of those people got to each other and still do to this day. And now with the conspiracy kind of paranormal, it's a really ugly scene. These people are basically trolls, online. They're really disrespectful to each other. And it seems to be a trope with them. But so I wanted to wind it down and give everybody a safe space to come talk about their experience, and there would be a record of it, and that would be part of it, right? This was the arc of this thing. This is how it played out. I would be more forthcoming with what was going on behind the scenes and talk about that. That was the part that I never got to do.
While Joseph didn't really get to have the ending he wanted for Ongs Hat, the myth of scientists traveling to different realities is now an actual legend that gets told by people who live near the town, which is kind of nice when you think about it. Joseph's story is now a part of history, and will be told as another folklore in the history of Ongs Hat for several decades to come.